is for a Refuah Shlema for Warren Carlos's mom, who's undergoing treatment. He told me the other day, and for Michal Bat Hirsch, another lady that's undergoing treatment. So please God, they have a speedy referral with all the Cholim of Klal Yisrael.
Amen. And I used to be.
Anyone else?
I used to be tenant of Louise Carlos and
Yes.
and Dave Carlos, and they're very special people, the parents.
Yeah.
I'm sure the children are too, but the parents.
Yeah, I know them, Dave very well, the father, and Daniel. Those are the two that I know quite well.
And Warren lives in Ramat Beit Shemesh. Oh, so.
I met him. He was he came down when it was the dad's 70th.
Last year, that's correct. Yeah.
That's right.
It was very nice. Right. And he spoke there. He spoke very well. Seems like and he's doing very well there, I believe, in Israel.
Thank God. Teach us, Kev.
Okay, so just a couple of minutes on Pesach, on stuff pre-Pesach and Seder. I'll try to be as brief as possible. Okay, so before Seder, before we even start Pesach, you have to do a bedikat and biur chametz. Bedikat means check, and biur is to annul. So the night before Pesach, which is nightfall tomorrow. So I don't know what time it is tomorrow, but yeah, it's like at about 7:40, probably. You have to check to see if you have any chametz lying around, and if you have, you put it in a bag and you burn it with the chametz on the morning of the actual Chag, which is actually Friday morning. Some people put pieces of bread in strategic locations, and they know where to find them, so they find it. So they said it could be a brocha levatala, I've heard. I don't know, Damon, if you heard that. If they don't find anything, like, 10 pieces of bread. There we go.
Yeah, just a tip of that is that make sure, firstly, you don't want to hide that which you know where it is, because that's deranged. If you're hiding that where you know where it is, it's deranged. So firstly, get somebody else to hide it, and don't do what I did, is I asked somebody to hide it. I forgot where they hid it. I didn't find everything. I ended up having chametz that I wouldn't have had we didn't play hide and seek. And also, this is Musa for tolerance of another religion, because we see that during this period ridiculous that there are people that run around hiding eggs in the garden. But what we do is we do something even more, is that we make sure that we turn off the lights, get a candle and get a feather and find something that we hid. Now, so before we mock other people, just to respect the fact of that every single belief system is coming with a set of rationales and tradition. Doesn't mean we have to accept it. But before we think ours is absolutely fantastic and everybody else is rubbish, we've got a myopia that we automatically think ours is logical and everybody else is rubbish. Just know that many times the whole point of religion is there's methodologies to create a mindset, to get you into the frame of mind to understand spiritually what you're doing through ritualistic mechanisms. And they do have a spiritual impact in the world. Obviously, our system is emet, but I'm saying just before one criticizes others, just look at yourself in the candle in the dark and realize that, it's also a little bit odd when you look at it from an outside perspective. And then maybe stay away from cruelty while you're doing a mitzvah. I just want to give you guys a very funny story. It was when my late mom was still alive. So what I did is I went under my office table where I was staying in Donata Street, and I was busy burning chametz with a candle, whatever, and I saw a spider. And what Arthur knows, I don't naturally like spiders. So what did I do? I burnt it crispy, piece by piece. I went, and I thought I was a big deal. And then I did the brocha for bedikat. You know the thing with searching for chametz or whatever. Anyway, I get up on top of a chair to look at the top where my cupboard was, where the bookshelf was, the business bookshelf was. And what happened is I didn't realize the ceiling fan was on at 200 k's an hour. So as I put my head up, all I know is I felt like 5 Lebanese guys had hit me with a baseball bat. I was lying on the floor bleeding, and my mother walked in, and she said to me, "What happened?" And I explained to her. She says to me, "Well, you deserved it." She said, "What are you doing torturing an 8-legged spider for when you're doing a brocha?" So, listen, it's also a bit of musa for me. Just thought I'd share that story.
Very good.
Well, that's a fantastic story, Damon.
So teach
Can
us
I
more,
continue?
Deb. Sure you can.
Okay, so Mechirat Chametz. Sorry, I hope you're not offended by that comment, Damon. So Mechirat Chametz means you cannot own any chametz, such as breads, pastas, beer, anything with grain and wheat in it, which I think we all know. Okay, eating on the day of eating on Erev Pesach, by a certain time of day, you have to eat. You have to stop eating chametz. You're not allowed to eat chametz. The 10th hour of the day, whatever the 10th halachic hour, not 10 a.m. So the 10, and then usually your shuls will send you a schedule of times to do everything. And now it says here, I don't know. Okay, I'm not going to go through. Okay, how to check? You have to obviously, before you prepare the different things for the Seder plate, you have to check the lettuce and clean the romaine lettuce correctly. And in terms of, let's go, okay, it says we're not going to touch on. Okay, kitniot is something that Sephardim are allowed to eat, such as legumes, beans, and certain other things like quinoa. Ashkenazim don't usually eat it. It's not chametz. It's not chametz, but it's not, for Ashkenazim, it's customary is not to eat it. If you eat it by mistake, it's not chametz. Obviously, avoid eating it. But if you do eat it by mistake, it's not chametz. But you have to try avoid it as much as possible. But you are allowed to eat if you have it. That is, I asked the question. Also, something like I eat chocolates. Some of these chocolates have got derivatives of kitniot, like lecithin. That's all right. If you eat like a piece of a bean, a raw bean, something like that, directly, then you're not allowed to do that. But you are allowed to, because the oils and certain foods have kitniot derivatives. There's no problem there. Okay, let's just go on to the Seder itself. So the Seder, just another, how much time do we have, Damon?
Well, I was hoping it wouldn't be as long as the Seder itself. But,
oh, yes. Okay, so the Seder, 4 cups of wine. You have to eat matzah. You have to tell the story. You have to search for the afikoman. And you have to do hallel in the benching. And when you eat the matzah, you have to lean to the left as well as drinking the wine. And that's basically, signifies freedom and royalty. So that's... But the main mitzvah is eat matzah, drink the 4 cups, and say the story over.
Okay.
That's it. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
How's
thanks,
that for a
Dave.
quick show? Okay.
I wouldn't call it quick, but it was definitely a sure.
One quick comment.
Sure.
Guys, if it wasn't for Pesach, we wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
You know that. None of us would be around. None of us would exist.
Absolutely. It's a good point.
And people...
That's why. Yeah. So it's even such a focal point throughout religion. And
people complain, they'll say this, it's a flip, it's 2 nights of 365 days a year, and here it's only 1 night, and people still, and they complain. I mean, if it wasn't for we wouldn't be here today. So, that's my 2 cents.
You're 100% correct. One of the best lessons you learn about Pesach is somebody said to me, why do we have to be grateful if there's something that's happened like 2,500 years ago, whatever the case might be? And I turned around and I said, if you ever watched Back to the Future, you can see that an event, you do one minor thing and it has repercussions that you can't even imagine the possible consequences of. All these time travel movies show the absolute ripple effects of actions, and that's what our mitzvahs get rewarded at. Is we can't see the consequence of our virus or our mitzvahs, and it's a big deal. The best character trait a Jew can have, there are many, but one of them is gratitude. Any human being can have that. If you're grateful for one thing somebody did for you in your life, and you just have a spirit of appreciation of everything that you have, you're bound to be a happier person than if you're looking at what you don't have working in your life. I can guarantee it. It's the only thing that can keep you sane is an appreciation of how bad your life could be and how good it is in comparison. Gratitude, not gratitude just in and of itself, because that is important, because it will cheer you up automatically, but a gratitude whom gave it to you. And that is Hashem, the one God. So let's get started. Dedicate.
Can I just add something? It's a one-liner. Just a great vision to have is to compare your life where you at to that ghastly picture when they were leaving Afghanistan and those guys were hanging onto the plane to try and get out of Afghanistan, and they fell off the plane when it got to like a certain amount of feet above the ground. Horrific.
Absolutely. All right. So on 68b1, Rav Yochanan objects to Rav Elazar's premise that the term selling refers only to a sale that effects acquisition and consummates the theft. 5:30 p.m. And the reason being is Rav Elazar was basically saying that there's a presumption that that the original owner despairs after something is stolen, and therefore after despair kicks in, then the thief owns it and therefore is liable to sell it, and it's a legitimate sale. And on that basis, he holds very much that is required in order to effect a proper acquisition, which is like Rav Sheshes. Rav Nachman, on the other hand, says it doesn't matter before or after despair kicks in. It's actually before or after, because the main thing of it is you're dealing with a repeated sinner here. And therefore, a person not only stole, but they're trying to sell or slaughter it to make it unredeemable to the original owner in the state that it was previously. So because of the repeated sinning, that's why there's a 4 or 5-fold, irrespective of whether the sale goes through because it's a successful acquisition due to despair and maybe a change of location. I don't know if Rav, if he holds the same as Rav, that despair alone affects acquisition, or you need a change of location. But either way, he's saying that has nothing to do with the 4 or 5-fold payment. That's for sure. So what we learned here is Rav Yochanan doesn't agree with Rav Elazar, because Rav Elazar is saying, look, a legitimate sale has to take place. Okay? And Rav Yochanan says, well, a legitimate sale doesn't necessarily have to take place in order for there to be eligibility for the 4 or 5-fold payment. So far it's sounding a little bit like Rav Nachman, because he's bringing the case, if you remember, of where in Shmot, Exodus chapter 21, verse 16, one who kidnaps a man and sells him shall be put to death. So that applies only if the kidnapper made use of his victim in some way. In other words, either as a labor component to shake him down for money, get money from the family, sell him as a slave. I'm assuming have his way with that person he kidnapped, whether it's male or female. Any sort of horrendous action coupled with the kidnapping results in a death penalty. So you need those two factors. There's some opinions that say the kidnapping alone. If you remember, I don't know if you know this, the kidnapping, the 10 Commandments, the big 10 are generally death penalty consequences. You know, in other words, adultery, murder, idolatry, those sort of things. So you say stealing, how could you get the death penalty for stealing? If you look at that actual Hebrew, it's talking about kidnapping, not stealing. So just know that that's actually one of the 10 Commandments. You're not allowed to kidnap.
No.
It's not about normal theft. Kev, is it urgent? But
you were talking about kidnapping yesterday.
Yeah.
You're talking about a person being kidnapped or the thief kidnapping the animal.
No, listen, you can't say, listen, I've got Betsy the cow. I've got a knife in your throat. If you don't give me $400, Betsy's going to be tickets. So what we're saying here is Rav Yochanan is making a different point. He's saying, look, when somebody is kidnapped, they never give up hope that they're going to be found by the FBI or the CIA or somebody's looking for them, they don't give up on themselves. So since they don't despair, because I'm saying they might go through moments of despair, but there's always a glimmer of hope that they're going to be rescued. We said in those days it would have been different. It's a bit different today with ISIS, because generally if it's some ideological fanatic, when they kidnap a person, that person's got a day or two before they make some video and they behead the person. But we're not talking about crazy people. We're talking about greedy people. And these are people that kidnap the person in order to sell them or hold them ransom so the family pays, or maybe has their sexual way with them and maybe would release the person, etc. But normal people, when we say normal, these are all psychopathic people, but they're levels. So in other words, the level is greed, maybe sexual desire, greed, maybe both, but certainly not ideologically just beheading for the sake of it. And by the way, these Muslims are not against holding somebody to ransom for money either, to go and sponsor their terrorism. But that aside, what Rav Yochanan is saying is that since a person doesn't give up hope that they're going to be freed, that this actual sale hasn't taken place because it's an illegal sale. In other words, take the theory of it. A person is an item. They then kidnapped and sold. If they give up hope of being found, then technically they can be acquired, and then the sale is legally valid. Not morally valid, legally valid. And therefore, only upon being legally valid do they get the punishment of the death penalty for kidnapping and selling. But we find Rav Yochanan saying that that's not the case. Firstly, that sort of sale is never valid, but in part because despair never affects acquisition, because a person doesn't give up hope of being rescued, therefore he doesn't really despair in totality. Even that aspect aside, the Gemara does bring a point and say that even if a person successfully sells another person, in other words, there is some lunatic person that's prepared to buy a slave, or the family pays the ransom, or the family, they don't end up selling the person or whatever, it doesn't matter. In other words, the kidnapper gets the death penalty if he steals someone, kidnaps them, and sells them. And therefore, that's proof that the person didn't despair, because you don't give up on yourself being rescued. There's always a glimmer of hope. And therefore, despair itself doesn't affect acquisition, and yet we still give the death penalty. So that's proof that it doesn't have to be an effective sale in order for the death penalty to be given in that case. And there's no, and so too, he's saying against Rav Elazar that you can't necessarily have the presumption that the original owner gives up hope of getting back his item either. But either way, you have to make a default position, Rav Elazar, that basically the original owner by default despairs of getting his item back the minute he's stolen, and therefore it's after despair. Immediately after it's stolen, there's despair, and therefore the thief can sell it because it says he acquired it through despair, and the change of location, the buyer bought it genuinely, and that's why we give a 4 5-fold payment. What Rav Yochanan is basically saying, Kevin, is that you give the penalty even in the case of kidnapping where the person doesn't despair. So that's proving despair isn't needed to affect acquisition in order to punish with a 4-fold or 5-fold payment in this case, because we still punish the kidnapper with a death penalty if he tries to sell it, even though the kidnapped person doesn't despair. So therefore, there's no proper sale. And even if the event doesn't go through properly, he still gets the death penalty. So that's the proof he's saying against Rav Elazar's position. Okay? So the Gemara analyzes Rav Yochanan's position. From Rav Yochanan's argument that the term sale denotes even a sale that does not affect acquisition, it's clearly implied that Rav Yochanan holds that a thief who sells the stolen animal before despair is liable to the 4-fold and 5-fold penalty. So that's clear from this, right? The question is, What, however, does he hold with respect to the sale after the original owner's despair? Okay, so you might say it's like Rav Nachman, because what did Rav Nachman say? Whether there was despair before or afterwards, you sinned repeatedly. He brings the brisa from Rabbi Akiva, and therefore, because the owner can never get the item back, especially if it's slaughtered, but even if it's a sale, the reality is you've sinned twice. You've stolen and then you slaughtered or sold it. In actual fact, you've damaged the person twice. And on that basis, whether despair is kicked in or not, either way, you paid a 4 or 5-fold penalty. So what we're saying here is, does Rav Yochanan hold the same way? Because we know that he issues a 4 or 5-fold penalty before the despair. Is it automatic that he issues the 4 or 5-fold payment after? So you might say, yeah, of course it's automatic, because despair definitely affects acquisition. And in that case, why wouldn't you pay a 4 or 5-fold payment? Because there's definitely a sale that took place, according to Rav Sheshes. So why would you even think that he'd have an issue about the 4 or 5-fold payment afterwards? It could be like Rav Nachman. Why would there be an issue? But there's a different way to look at it. He could hold that afterwards, it might be a case where despair doesn't affect acquisition. Why? I'm just giving you an idea to look at, is that we could say, if there's despair, let's take the presumption of Rav Elazar, the minute it's stolen, the original owner despairs. Therefore, since he despairs, the thief acquires it. And Gavin, since the thief acquires it, he's able to sell it to the buyer. And even if you're holding according to Rav and Rabbah, despair alone affects acquisition. But if you're holding according to some of the other opinions, you need a change of domain as well. And according to most opinions, then selling it to a buyer would affect the acquisition. Okay, does that make sense? So in other words, there would be a sale. So what would be the problem if an effective sale took place, just like an effective selling of a kidnapped victim to the slave trade or for ransom money? Surely then the death penalty definitely kicks in, definitely. So it's saying, yeah, it's obvious. Saying it's not so obvious because there are opinions in the Gemara. Kevin, this is important. There are opinions in the Gemara that state actually that's not the case. Because how did the argument start off with regards to a physical change? And the physical change is the same as despair. It says, listen, if I've acquired that, if I stole the animal and slaughtered it, I've acquired it through the physical change because I can never return the animal in the living state that you used to work the animal on the farm. And therefore I acquired it. And therefore I have to pay, I certainly have to pay the principal at a time of theft, and I probably have to pay a kefil payment. But do I pay the 4 or 5-fold penalty, as it says in the Chumash? Because if I've acquired it through the physical change, where the owner's going to despair of getting it back, he's not getting back his living animal, whether it's a pet or a workhorse. In that case, the original owner despairs because the slaughtering has forced that physical change. He's going to despair of getting his living animal, functional animal back. And therefore, since the thief acquires it, if at that point he slaughtered it, does he actually have to pay a 4 or 5-fold payment? Because it is his animal he's slaughtering. It is his animal he's selling. So that's one of the opinions. Is there even a 4 or 5-fold payment? Do you understand what I'm saying? Because, in other words, despair occurs with the original owner because of the physical change. And therefore, does that mean that because of the physical change, the thief has acquired it? Say if he slaughtered his own animal, technically, why would he have to pay the 4 or 5-fold payment? And we learned that there were two arguments against that. The one argument is, yes, you pay the original amount, and some opinions say you pay the kefil, the penalty. So in other words, if the ox was worth 100 zuz, you pay that, and you pay the kefil like you'd steal any other item at another 100 zuz as a penalty. So you're paying then twice, technically, twofold. but that's a different pasuk. But you're not eligible to the 4 or 5-fold payment. And you pay it at the time of theft, not at the time where the physical change took place. Because the animal dead is worth less than when it's alive. When it's a workhorse, it means it's worth more than at the butchery. Then there's another opinion that says you pay the 4 or 5-fold, but that at the time of theft, which means while the animal was living, and you're doing it for a different reason. Is you're paying it at the time of theft, not when he's sued in court, like before the slaughtering, because at that point the animal is worth more, and because the thief committed an avera, why should he be left off the hook? And you remember there was that discussion with Rabba that turned around and said, look, with Rabba, also where, I don't know if it was Rav or Rabba, even though they hold by the same opinion, that basically said, look, let's see when this incident of despair took place. If the despair took place after it went missing, the thief caused the despair. So why should we reward him? In other words, the thief caused the physical change. So why would we reward him with him having the animal and not have to pay the 4 or 5-fold payment? Because he's the one that stole it, implemented that sort of avera, and then slaughtered the animal. So otherwise, every thief would steal an animal and slaughter it immediately, so they're off the hook for the 4 or 5-fold payment. It's obvious. So in actual fact, yes, he does acquire it, the carcass, but he still has to pay the 4 or 5-fold back. But that is dependent at the time of theft, because not at the time when you slaughtered the animal, because then that animal is worth less. So what we want to know here is, does Rav Yochanan basically say, yes, after despair, you still pay the 4 or 5-fold because the sale certainly took place. It wasn't only that he sinned repeatedly. Or do we say that since it's his animal he acquired, there's no 4 or 5-fold payment after despair? We don't know how he holds after despair. We do know that before despair, he still says, just like with a kidnapping, whether the successful kidnapping happened or not, because you did such a thing, you have to pay the 4 or 5-fold. So let's examine what he actually answers. So what he actually says is as follows. The Gemara states a discussion in which Rav Yochanan's view in this matter is stated explicitly. Rav Yochanan says if the thief slaughters or sells the stolen animal after the owner's despair, he is liable to the 4-fold and 5-fold payment. So therefore we learn that Rav Yochanan definitely holds that after despair, there's a 4 or 5-fold payment, because even more so the transaction went through. And he doesn't hold, like Rav and Rabba, that since despair affects acquisition, there's not necessarily a 4 or 5-fold payment. You know what I'm saying? Because he only got that animal, he only got that despair through theft. So even according to Rav Elazar, if he says despair is presumed automatic against thievery, why should you reward the thief? So he definitely holds Rav Yochanan either way, either before or after the despair, he's liable to the 4 or 5-fold payment. But Reish Lakish says he's not liable. So the contradicting opinion to Rav Yochanan is his contemporary Rav Lakish. And the Gemara explains that the reason why Rav Yochanan says that he's liable is he maintains that the thief's liability to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment for slaughtering or selling a stolen animal applies both prior to the owner's despair and after the owner's despair. But Reish Lakish said he's not liable, for he maintains that a thief's liability to the 4-fold or 5-fold penalty is specifically for slaughtering or selling the animal prior to the owner's despair. But after the owner's despair, the thief acquires the animal, and it is his own animal that he's slaughtering. It is his own animal that he's selling. So again, Reish Lakish is saying, look, whether or not you like it or not, the thief will pay the 4 or 5-fold. He won't pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. Okay, what he'll do is he will pay double, like for a normal theft, because by virtue of the fact that he's selling the animal, okay, or the fact that he's slaughtering the animal, that only comes about before the despair, because it's not his animal he's selling. So if despair hasn't kicked in, Reish Lakish says you then pay the fourfold or fivefold payment because you're selling what's not yours. If you're slaughtering and despair hasn't kicked in from the original owner, you are slaughtering what is not yours, and therefore you're eligible for the four or fivefold payment. But if you steal it and you wait a period of time for the original owner to despair, or if we say the case of Rav Elazar, that it's an automatic despairing when it goes missing, in that case, when despair kicks in, it belongs to the thief, and therefore thief can do with his item what he wants. He can sell it or slaughter it, and he's only liable in that case to a twofold payment for the principal, okay, as well as the penalty amount. So that's paying twice. So what we're going to what we're going to do is see there's a challenge that Rav Yochanan gives against Reish Lakish's position, and trying to bring proof that this isn't necessarily the case. Okay.
Damon, I make a comment.
Sure.
It seems like, okay, once the original owner despairs, the thief becomes the de facto owner, and he gets the rights of an owner. It seems a bit weird and absurd. You know what I mean?
It is, except that the original owner doesn't end up penniless without restitution. Listen, worst case, he gets double, Kevin.
Yeah. But it's that he becomes the new owner, and he's no, sure, he at least gets double. Yeah.
At least, but my argument in my puny little brain says to me, listen, anybody wants to get out of the four or fivefold payment, and therefore, why would the pasuk be interpreted that way? Because the minute you get the animal, you kill it. So the first thing you do, so that your worst case.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or sell it. Absolutely. I think, in my humble opinion, I think the best is when despair kicks in automatically. If something's stolen from me, I've got no idea who stole it. I'm despaired already. Then if you're not aware that it was stolen.
Okay, but there's one problem with that I have, is that if despair is automatic, then according to Reish Lakish, who doesn't necessarily say it's automatic, he just mentions at whatever point despair kicks in, he's saying, listen, then you own the animal as the thief. You're not responsible for the four or fivefold payment, just for the double payment. So that's the problem.
Oh, no, yeah. So, sorry, that's right. That's a problem as well. That's even worse.
Yeah, so I then why mention it in the pasuk at all? That's my question. If that's the interpretation, why mention it? It's never going to get to that stage. And in fact,
so then in essence,
yeah,
despair then really would take place then just after selling. As soon as you find out that your item has been sold or your item has been slaughtered, that's when you're going to despair. Because up until then, you think you've got a good chance of getting it back. So I don't see you're always going to end up paying the penalty. In my opinion, even though there's a loophole, I don't think the loophole in practice will ever take place.
Well, it would according to Rav Elazar. That's the issue. That's my biggest difficulty, because in other words, no, he's cleverer than me. But what I'm saying is, if he's cleverer than me, if despair kicks in automatically, okay, and therefore that would mean that the thief would acquire it, and he only ever has to pay a twofold. What do you do with the pasuk that talks about a fourfold or fivefold?
Yeah, no, that's the problem. I agree. So I've retracted that. I agree with you. That was the problem.
And in actual fact, in that particular case, what the first thing you do is you wouldn't even wait to basically you'd slaughter the animal immediately. But there could be a default that although you own the animal by virtue of acquiring it, you still pay the four or fivefold technically. You just get to own the animal, but it's difficult to have a position where despair effects acquisition, and then you're off the hook, because immediately you wouldn't even wait for despair, guys. This is what I'm saying. What you would do is immediately slaughter the animal you stole, because a physical tax affects acquisition immediately, and then you'd only be eligible for double. You wouldn't even wait for it to get to the despair stage. Why would you?
Absolutely.
So, all right. But look, because you're paying back double, that doesn't go away, because that's, if he steals, he shall pay double. Does that make sense? Not if he robs. If he steals, he shall pay double. So automatically, Kevin, the original owner is better off. He's better off.
But why? Robbing is it's also a twofold payment. Or it's only the principle if it's a robbery.
Principle.
Why is it more stringent than normal theft?
Okay, because
that's very strange. Yeah.
Rav Simcha Steinhauer and Rabbi Arbach has answered Gavin and myself as follows: when a robber holds somebody at knife point, he's not afraid of people and he's not afraid of Hashem. The guy's generally pretty stupid. And in that particular case, it's not seen as an affront to Hashem at the same degree, because he's generally fearless of everybody, which is a sign of stupidity. And therefore, he doesn't pay double, he just pays what he owes. Because I said the same as you did to Rav Simcha Steiner. I said, I think a robbery is more traumatic than a theft, because if somebody hijacks a person, they're far more emotionally traumatized than somebody that steals an object while you're at work. And in fact, you should pay double for the robbery because it's far more emotionally traumatic. So Rav Simcha Steinhaus says it's not seen as that. It's seen not about the emotional trauma, but how Hashem sees it. And Hashem sees robbery as being less insulting to him than theft, because what theft implies is you don't want people to know that you stole it, so you do it on the quiet because you care about what people think, but you know Hashem is watching you all the time. And a person that steals like that doesn't care what Hashem thinks, but he's more afraid of people's opinion of him. And therefore, since that's a far higher level of despicable character, on that basis he pays double. That's what was explained to me by Rav Simcha Steinhauer, and that was explained to Gavin by Rabbi Arbach. Am I wrong, Gavin?
No, 100%. And they both it's good answers.
Okay. So let me just go on. We've got a little. Hang on, Gavin. What time is mincha at the shul?
No, I'm not going tonight. It doesn't matter. I'm not feeling 100%.
Right, so we've only got 10 minutes left, but let's cover ground because we're making massively decent progress considering we're 3 duffs behind where we should be. Okay? So, Rav Yochanan challenges Reish Lakish's position from the following Mishnah, and the Mishnah is in 74b of Bava Kamma. If one stole an ox or a sheep and he consecrated it, and afterwards he slaughtered it, he pays the twofold payment. In other words, to the original owner. So Rashi is saying, although the twofold payment does not ordinarily apply to consecrated property, because, as you know, that it says when you steal from your fellow. So consecrated property is to Hashem, it's not to your fellow Jew. It does apply in this case, because although the animal is now consecrated, it was not consecrated at the time of theft, which is a critical moment in regard to the applicability of the penalty, according to Rashi. So if it's stolen from the guy's home, even if it's consecrated after, it's not being stolen from his fellow, from Hashem at that point. It's not like it's an item that's already been consecrated. Okay? So if that's the case, then there's a twofold payment. But he does not pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. Okay? And because when he slaughtered the animal, it had already been consecrated. In other words, there's a difference in time between the theft and the slaughtering. Again, he stole the animal while it was alive from somebody's house. He then had already been consecrated. He took it to the temple to consecrate the thief, and the 4-fold and 5-fold penalty doesn't apply to a consecrated animal. Because if you look at the 2-fold payment for starters, Shemot chapter 22, verse 8, it says, he shall pay 2-fold to his fellow which teaches that he pays kefil only to his fellow Jew, not to Hekdesh, not to Hashem. And since the Torah exempts him from the kefil payment, he's exempted as well from the fourfold and fivefold payment when he slaughters or sells. So Rashi is saying that whenever you see generally a penalty payment waived in a certain case, it's generally waived in another case. It's not always, if it's waived, by the way, guys, in a four or fivefold, it doesn't mean it's waived in a twofold. But when it's waived in the lesser, it's generally waived in the more. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, in the more severe case.
Yeah.
But it's not always waived in the lesser case if it's waived in the more severe case. In other words, Kevin, if a penalty is twofold is waived for whatever reason, you can be sure a more stringent penalty is waived. If the more strict penalty is waived, it doesn't mean the less stringent penalty is waived. So as a guard, whenever you see that the twofold penalty is waived, because in this case, it says if he stole from his fellow Jew, in that case, it's a twofold payment, but not if he steals from a consecrated, because you're stealing from Hashem. And therefore, there's no twofold payment in that case. Okay? So then there would definitely not be a four or fivefold payment. That's for sure. Does that make sense? My issue is that if it's seen as an affront to Hashem, that a thief is not afraid of Hashem, and yet is afraid of man's opinion of him, why is he let off the twofold payment when he steals from Hashem and not when he steals from man? It should be more stringent. He should not be let off the hook. It seems contradictory. It's just my opinion. And there are people that hold by, not my opinion, but I'm holding by a certain opinion that says for Hekdesh, you even pay a more stringent penalty. Do you remember this argument with Rabbi Akiva before? That it's only if you damage if Hekdesh damages you that it doesn't have to pay, but not if you damage Hekdesh. You definitely have to pay. And you have to pay for more superior land. So that would hold almost according to the opinion that I'm saying now, my own personal view, is that you can't have a more stringent case of offense to Hashem than that, and then make a twofold penalty kick in because of that, and then waive it when you're only stealing from Hashem. Doesn't make sense. So even if the pasuk says does not steal from his fellow, it might mean that there's a twofold payment to a fellow Jew, and not if Hekdesh damages you, but if you damage Hekdesh. Okay. So anyway, we basically know that the Torah prescribes only a fourfold or fivefold payment. But okay, so in that case, it's saying that at first there's a twofold payment because that's when it was stolen. But there's at that point the twofold payment automatically kicks in because he steals it from his fellow Jew. So that pasuk kicks in, but not the four or fivefold, because that penalty wouldn't kick in when he slaughters or sells it, because he's already consecrated the item. Okay? Does that make sense, Gavin? Because the timeline is different. Okay, but what it's implying, though, is it says, now when did the thief consecrate or slaughter the animal? If you will say that he did so prior to the owner's despair, but then does the animal become consecrated? In other words, if the original owner despaired, he's not going to be able to sacrifice that which is not his. Because the merciful one says in his Torah, if you remember in Leviticus Vayikra chapter 27 verse 14, if a man consecrates his house to be holy, so that teaches one can only consecrate something similar to your house, meaning that just as a person's home is his, so to anything that is consecrated has to be his. In other words, he has to own it. He can't a thief steal a stolen animal prior to the owner's despair, because the consecration wouldn't take effect. Rather, it's obvious that the Mishnah must refer to where the thief consecrated and slaughtered the animal after the owner's despair. And it's evident from the Mishnah, the only reason that he does not pay the four or fivefold payment is that he consecrated the animal. That is, in other words, when he slaughtered the animal, he's slaughtering that which belongs to the Hekdesh, to the temple. But if he had not consecrated the animal, he would have been eligible to pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. Okay? And in other words, what it's saying is the Mishnah is teaching that a thief who, after the owner's despair, consecrated the stolen animal and then slaughters it is not liable to the 4-fold and 5-fold payment only if he consecrated it, but if he did not consecrate it, he'd be eligible. So if it should enter your mind to say, as Reish Lakish did, in fact, that despair alone affects acquisition, then why does he pay? Because why would he pay a 4 or 5-fold if he didn't consecrate it? Because despair alone affected acquisition. Because it's his own animal that he's slaughtering and his own animal that he's selling. So that's a good proof against